Now, the Prime Minister has announced plans to build new gas power stations as backup for unreliable wind and solar power to cut the risk of energy blackouts due to, his own net zero pledges. Well, joining me right now is energy commentator and former director at the UK Onshore Oil and Gas, and that's Charles McAllister. Good morning to you, Charlie.
More, Julia. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. I mean, this announcement, well, by the way, he's not actually announced. The headline says he's announcing new gas power stations. There's a consultation on them. They ain't going to be building them anytime soon. There might be some question marks on whether it's even legal to build any new gas power stations, given the country's net zero pledges enshrined in law. But let's just talk, before we go into all that, let's just talk about and explain to, especially my lovely friend in the studio, Charlie Rowley, who I've been lambasting about this and how the Tories don't get this, about why you would need to have backup for the wonderful brilliance of solar power and wind power when that's the future and we're heading to net zero, and apparently all our electricity is going to be net zero and clean and renewable by 2030 if you're Labour and 2035 if you're the Tories. Why would you need backup?
I can do that, Julia. So if you look at the studies that have been produced, they've shown that the available baseload electricity, so the sort of nuclear gas, the availability of that between 2028 and 2030 is insufficient to meet peak demand by a factor of about 10%. Why is that? Because gas-fired power stations that were built in the 90s are being decommissioned. By April 2028, the UK will have all but one nuclear reactor, Sizewell B, and Hinkley Point C has been delayed again. So, electricity is needed for 3,500 seconds every hour, every day, all year. So the rationale to sort of provide baseload electricity is sound. I think a really interesting point to sort of go on the wind and solar point is if you look at the load factor for those technologies. So let's say you have
explain what load factor means.
Sure. So let's say you have a solar farm that is a gigawatt capacity, okay, that will only be available. The load factor is only 10% for solar. So even though your solar farm is a gigawatt, you'll only be able to produce 0.1 of a gigawatt over the year. Why is that? Because we have this phenomenon called nighttime and cloud. So it's the exact same with wind, but it's much higher for wind. It's about 40%. So the rationale for this is completely sound. My sort of caveats to that would be, things like the windfall tax have disincentivized UK natural gas production. So it could end up that these new gas-fired power stations are fueled with imported gas. That's one. And two is I don't think we should be distracted from the concept that the largest source of gas demand in the UK is home heating. 84% of homes in the UK heat with natural gas. If we don't boost natural gas production, we're going to be more reliant on imports. And if anyone disagrees with the statement, okay, that British gas is better economically, environmentally, or geopolitically than imported gas, there's an ideology there.
Absolutely. This is the thing. A lot of the net zero pledges are based on, Frank, let's be honest, pie-in-the-sky nonsense about our energy needs. I'm always fascinated by how many people don't know what percentage of our total energy needs, renewables can produce. Again, on a good day, you're looking at sort of 50% of our electricity needs. And our electricity needs are going up all the time because apparently we're all going to be driving electric cars and all the other things we're going to rely on for electricity instead of on fossil fuels. But that's only 20% of our total needs because you say we're heating our homes, we're factories, we're making steel, we're powering our vehicles. All of the policies seem to sort of be competing with each other. So we're going to have everybody buying electric cars. They pushed it back 5 years, but the sale of new cars that are not purely electric, not even hybrid, that's been pushed back, but it's still down the line coming in a very, very, very short period of time. At the same time as we don't have enough electricity to be reliant on now. And as you say, in a few years' time, we won't have enough nuclear power stations, solar, wind or gas power stations on the current plans to actually power what our needs are now, let alone in the future. There is no information that is new that Rishi Sunak has had in the last year, certainly in the last week, before he's made this announcement. Everybody who pays any attention to this knows that we would have to build more nuclear power stations and new gas power stations. And yet we find in this country they take years to build. When do you think any of these could be actually online, providing backup and ensuring Julia gets to keep her heating on in the winter, and I feel very strongly about heating, and everyone keeps to keep the lights out, because we're a first world country. We shouldn't be talking about blackouts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've been talking about this for years, Julia. Look, this is not as you say, this is basically a consultation on it. No planning applications have gone in. Now, these big gas-fired power stations would go in through the NSIP route, nationally significant infrastructure projects. So the decision would be made centrally rather than locally, and that would speed things up, hypothetically. But will this be subject to legal challenge? Absolutely. There's no question that that would happen. To go back to the other point about shares of different technologies, I mean, you're absolutely right. I do think this really leads into energy literacy. The share of energy that comes from wind and solar in the UK last year was 4.8%. So when you read about renewables providing, 40% of electricity, that is exactly as you say, only electricity. It's that 20% share. So this needs to be looked in a whole profile perspective. Today, oil and gas, 75% of UK energy demand. In 2050, assuming we meet all targets, it's going to be 25%. One thing I'm going to slightly disagree with what you said earlier, Julia, a rare thing, I admit, but slightly, is I do think that the 2035 zero carbon electricity target is technically achievable. We can have an argument as to whether or not it's desirable. But you see the 2030 Labour target to meet net zero electricity system with no gas, that is completely, technically not achievable. It's not. No matter how hard you try, it is not
going to happen. But this is it. With politicians promising stuff, they know if they're paying attention, they can't achieve. And if they're making policy announcements and pledges like this that they haven't paid attention to, that's even more worrying. And at a time where we've got a very, very dangerous geopolitical situation, possibly, we've got a war in Europe, we've got possibilities of other things happening. I mean, I'm sorry, but we need to be able to be self-sustainable in energy. We need to be able to make our steel. We need to be able to make, build planes and warship. We need to keep the lights on. We need to be able to, do the most basic stuff in this country. I find it extraordinary that the level of the debate about this is so misinformed. I'm getting to the point when, with politicians, thank God I don't have to do the morning round with their MPs and shadow ministers and cabinet ministers anymore. And literally, they should all be given a quiz. Every single voter should be going up to politicians and asking them basic questions. What percentage, of our energy need is provided by solar and wind? And if they don't know, and usually, by the way, they don't know to a factor of they're out by, 100%, then I'm sorry, these people should not be allowed to make a decision when they have no basis, in fact, to make that decision. We need to get back to evidence-based policy making, not pie in the sky, green nonsense.
I'm completely with you, Julia. Look, I mean, my view from a macro basis is that there does need to be a complete overhaul of security of supply. And I mean that from a well-to-wire energy, field to fork, food, dam to drain, water, and furnace to factory manufacturing. And the common denominator across all of those is reliable energy supply. And given 75% of oil and gas, the common denominator is reliable oil and gas supply.
Charlie, I mean, you've nailed it. No, you've nailed it. We're going to leave it there. You've nailed it.